1290 CJBK London. It's 154.
Welcome, music fans, to the Music Virgins No More podcast. Now here are your hosts, John and Jason.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Music Virgins No More podcast. I'm John Schlarbaum.
And I'm Jason Kavanaugh.
As an introduction, Jason and I have had a shared admiration for Bruce Springsteen, the Beatles, Boston, and the Knack, yet disagree on the musical merits of U2 and Cheap Trick. Although there is a 20-year difference in our ages, we have remained friends for over 18 years.
This podcast is based on John's preteen memories of Top 40 AM radio between 1979 and 1982, when, sadly, he created personal weekly music charts alone in his bedroom in southwestern Ontario.
True story. Now, each podcast will dive deep into these charts and discuss the music that, in part, became the soundtrack of my life. Now, as for the name of the podcast, Music Virgins No More, it really has a double meaning. First, it references my personal journey as a young record collector starting in the late 1970s and into the early 1980s. And second, to Jason's current journey with me as he discovers, sometimes for the first time, music and bands he was totally unaware of before now.
Through weekly song analysis and group profiles, our goal is to entertain and educate all music lovers, but especially those who lived through the early 1980s scene in Canada. To start this first podcast off right, I want to ask John a question that will no doubt be a reoccurring one during the future episodes. John, what were you thinking?
That's a very good question indeed, Jason. Well, here's a little bit of history to my record collecting. It all started when I was about 13 years old, and for many people in North America, the biggest place to get records was the Columbia House Record Club. So this would have been in 1978, 79, and this was a great mail order organization that you would get 13 records or tapes for $1. And then over the next 3 years, you would have to buy 8 more selections at regular club prices, which at the time was probably about $6.98 to $7.98 plus shipping. So the deal with the record club was once a month, a card would arrive at my house and it'd have a featured album that they've decided for me that I needed. So I could either check the box and mail the card back to them, declining it, or I could do nothing and this record would magically appear at my house.
So as I understand it, that may be one of the original negative option billing practices in which customers are given goods that were not previously ordered and must either continue to pay for it or specifically decline it in advance of billing.
Exactly. So in some ways, it's kind of a scam, but in other ways, for a young collector like me, it was an easy way to get a bunch of records all at once and start my record collecting. So along with this card was a catalog that contained hundreds of other albums that I could also purchase every month. So not just that one album. And doing some research, I discovered that the company was started in 1955s and it offered records and then 8-track tapes, then cassettes, then CDs, as well as reel-to-reel tapes.
So John, you're what, 12 years old at the time? Do you remember any of the albums that you bought?
Some of the first I do recall would be like Billy Joel's 52nd Street, Aerosmith's Draw the Line, Steve Miller's Fly Like an Eagle, Eddie Money's debut album, Chicago Hot Streets, Linda Ronstadt's Living in the USA when she's, on roller skates on the album cover, and then maybe like Heart's Greatest Hits Live. So a very eclectic collection of groups that were probably very popular that I may have known their songs or their albums previous to this, or that I thought, hey, everybody's buying this. I need this new Eddie Money guy, whoever he is.
That's quite the spread. You go from Steve Miller, Fly Like an Eagle, to Linda Ronstadt. Okay, so as a teenager, without all of the modern accoutrements like the internet notifying you every week of what you should listen to or what they think you might like, this curated way of getting music now. How did you know what songs or albums were popular? How were you fed this upcoming music?
Well, kids have it so easy today, and they don't understand that.
Oh, that makes you sound real old.
I am old, Jason. So for me, every Friday, the London Free Press, I grew up in southwestern Ontario, they publish Canada's RPM magazine's top 10 singles and albums. Now, for anybody of my age, RPM magazine was basically our version of Billboard magazine, the U.S. Chart collector. And now, as a paper carrier from 1974 to 1982, I'd read these entries every Friday. And at one point, for whatever reason, I started to cut them out and keep them. And as my interest in records increased, I'd use these listings to keep up to date on new records released.
So what stations were you listening to? You had a pretty neat perspective with Detroit nearby. I'm sure that radio kind of leaked into your area. What were you listening to?
Well, the Big Eight, as people know in the Windsor area, would have been CKLW, which was a pioneer of music in the 70s and 80s. But I was about 90 minutes away from that area. We did get CKLW, and I did listen to it. But my two main stations would be two competing stations that were both top 40 stations. One was CJBK, and the other one was CKSL. Now, the cool thing was each of them published a weekly chart available for free at record store checkouts or next to the wall slots filled with each 45 single. And for those who don't know what a 45 single is, it was the greatest invention of the music age. So it's a 7-inch disc that basically had the hit song on one side, and then you would flip it over and there'd be a B-side. So I started collecting these charts in 1979 until I moved from the area in 1984. And for whatever reason, I preferred CJBK listings over CKSLs. So that is one of the biggest things that I was able to see songs and how they went from the top 4 or maybe the top 30 and continued up every single week. I would get these charts, and so that's how I sort of got interested in specific songs as well.
That's such an organic way to find music. I wish we had something a little more like that these days, but
don't we have like random shuffle on like Spotify or something? Or you can sort of find stuff like that.
Tidal does the made for you section, and I'm sure Spotify has something similar.
It does,
and the algorithm is pretty good actually. They nail my taste pretty much every time. So this is what this is all about. When did you start creating your own charts?
Now, the first chart is dated on August the 23rd, 1980. So I'm 14 years old and 5 months, just to be specific here. And I decided to keep track of the singles that I owned in chart form for whatever reason. So the first chart consisted of the top 15 singles and the top 15 groups that I had albums of. Now, about 7 weeks later, I added a top 10 albums chart as well. Now, these charts ran for 106 consecutive weeks, ending basically 2 years later on August 28th, 1982. So you essentially have 2 years, a 2-year window of what at least my top 40 musical tastes were every single week. So this wasn't something that I just did for a couple weeks and went, oh, this is kind of interesting. This is something that I put a lot of energy and thought into at the time.
Now, we've talked about this extensively, but one of the big rules for you was that you had to own the album for it to make your charts, right?
Yeah. So really the rules that I had, usually, music industry charts like Billboard or RPM magazine were based on radio plays and record sales and requests. Yeah, my only rule was that I physically had to own the 45 or the album to qualify for it to be on the chart. So, take it that I owned the album The Game by Queen, which contained the single Play the Game. Now, for it to chart, I actually had to go out and purchase the 45 as well. And I'll tell you right now, this rule did not last very long.
Okay, and over this magical period of the early 80s, do you have any chart statistics that will wow our audience?
Oh, I can wow them. For these 106 consecutive weeks, 163 different singles charted, as well as 73 full-length albums. A couple other facts are there was 33 singles that hit number one. 2 of those songs were number one for 8 weeks. And also there was 5 songs that were tied for lasting just 1 week. And also there was 13 albums that were number one over this period, with the longest being 20 weeks. And the shortest album to be number one lasted only 2 weeks. So there is a huge collection of songs and full-length albums, and you used to listen to the entire album from start to finish. You didn't cherry pick what you do these days or hide a track. You would listen to an album from start to finish because you had a record and a record player, that you put the needle down on the first track and it went all the way to the middle, which was, 5 or 6 songs.
Okay, I hope I'm not giving anything away here by asking this too soon, but I'm dying to know, who was it that was on the charts for 20 weeks?
I'm sure we'll discuss this in a later podcast. Maybe we'll just highlight all the number one albums on the charts or number one singles on the charts. But the album that was number one for 20 weeks was Foreigner 4's 1981 album, titled 4, as it was their 4th album. And for people of, a certain age, you would have the big songs Urgent, Waiting for a Girl Like You, and Jukebox Hero. So that was the one that hit number one and stayed there for 20 full weeks. So it was very popular in my house. Well, at least my bedroom.
Well, we'll have to compare, your chart on that one with the actual charts, the Billboard charts, in a later episode too. I'm curious to see who thought it was more popular, you or the public.
Well, and we're going to do that. When we actually, today's episode is sort of an introductory, where the charts came from, what the mindset was. But in subsequent podcasts, we're going to check out specific charts and go through them, song by song, or highlight specific groups and that. And at the end of every episode, we are going to see what, where the song or album was that week on the Billboard charts, RPM charts, and the London radio charts as well. So you will see if I'm way, way off, or I might actually be ahead of the curve sometime. I might have a number one single that doesn't hit number one for several weeks, so I look like a genius.
I only learned about these charts about a year ago. How many other people knew that you were doing these? Like any of your friends in the last 40 years? Does anybody know about these?
Well, technically, I believe that only 2 people, and this is years and years later, people knew about this chart or have seen these actual physical charts that I typed up on my little typewriter and everything. And you can go to the Instagram and Facebook page to see the typewriter and the charts. But I don't believe either was really overly impressed or interested in them. I don't even think my best friend and fellow music lover, Sam, who I grew up with, and we were best friends, knew about them. And we can probably ask him on a future episode. We're going to have guests come on to the podcast as well. You can probably be prepared for his uncontrollable laughter when he hears about this. But during the time I was making them, I was in high school. I was in grade 9 and grade 10. And I think it was really just an escape or hobby that I kept to myself. I didn't find it weird or anything. It was just something that interested me, and I found it cool to do. And it wasn't harming anybody.
And why did you stop? I mean, that was only 2 years you did this. And I mean, it seems like it was kind of fun and kind of neat. There's a lot of 80s songs that was, just on the cusp of being released at that point. Music I know you liked, and I still do as well. Like what made you stop?
I think really is a combination sort of finally quitting my, quote unquote childhood paper route, which I'd done from the age of 8 to 16. I was about to enter grade 11 the next week, and I started a, sort of a more mature job as a gas jockey at a service station on the 401. So really it was just, I think I was like, you know what, it's time to grow up. And now, years and years later, I'm like, I really probably could have done it another couple of years, but such is life. we have these fantastic charts, and that's what we're going to focus on for the podcast.
The first charts come out at the very end of summer 1980, featuring only the top 15 singles and top 15 groups. When you look back on it, what do you find interesting about them?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that the singles were all staples of AM radio at the time, with the majority of them by firmly established groups like Queen, the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney and Wings, Elton John. But when you look at it, there was a few new bands making their mark too, sort of like the Pretenders, which I just more or less introduced to you in the last little while, which I think you like. Gary Newman, Robbie Dupree, and the King Bees. Now, some of these went on to record, music for years to come. They may even still be recording music today, while others became one or two hit wonders. Another topic we'll tackle in a future episode, because those episodes are always great. Like, why was this such a great song? How could these guys have not duplicated it, on the next album or anything?
I'm really looking forward to that one hit wonder episode.
I think it'll be cool because, again, even people of your age, Jason, would know these songs because they're played over and over again because they're very, very popular. But then nothing happened to the groups afterwards, which is always, very interesting. It's almost like an author who has, a giant book and everybody's read it, and then nothing ever he doesn't bring out a second book or a third book, or he just sort of disappears and people are left with this 3.5 minute gem of a song, or, it has an earworm melody or chorus, and, you don't have any more of it, unfortunately. Sometimes when you go back, like recently, I've gone back because of the podcast and, through Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music. I mean, now you can just download an entire album. And I've recently discovered some great songs on albums that I didn't purchase at the time, but I had the singles of the group that did really well on the chart. So I think we're going to discuss that later on too, that a lot of times it's sort of a missed opportunity. That maybe they were a one-hit wonder, but if I would have bought their entire album 40 years later, I would have had 5 or 6 songs that were equally as good, but I didn't hear them on the radio.
This may have to be a two-parter. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, and what about the top 15 groups rankings? How are they determined? When I look at the list, like the singles chart, I see lots of bands that made their name and reputations in the 70s.
Well, at the time, you have to remember, like, I'm only 12, 13 years old at the time, but I had been collecting records sporadically, maybe for a few years, and discovered groups that I liked and then would buy some of their earlier albums, not just their latest releases. So the groups listing were my favorite bands during a specific week. But as you know, like for the most part, rankings would not change much week to week. So on the very first chart, my top 5 groups were Paul McCartney and Wings, number 2, Queen, number 3, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, number 4, Billy Joel. Now, all of these groups I had multiple albums of, either their latest ones or older ones, so I kind of knew what they were all about. And number 5 was Pete Townsend of The Who, which was based solely on his solo album, Empty Glass.
Which I've just started listening to thanks to you, and it's great.
It's fantastic. It really is. Like, everybody knows the song, Let My Love Open the Door, but there's just so much more to that album. And when you listen to it, you could go, this would have been a great Who album as well. If you start, taking out Pete's voice and adding Roger Daltrey's, and then, forceful voice. But he decided to make it a solo album. And to me, it's still, I could listen to that album this afternoon and enjoy every track of it. So I have all these groups that were, firmly established, in record charts, and they've been around probably from the 70s, or I've just sort of discovered them myself. So when you look at this first chart, all those groups that I just said, McCartney, Queen, Seger, Joel, Townsend, I mean, they were all fairly established bands from, they started in the 70s essentially, and now they were getting bigger coming into the 80s, the transition of the 80s. And with that in mind, like, you look ahead 2 months later on my charts to, the 1st of October, 1980, And you'll see other bands like the Monks, who people in Southwestern Ontario will know exactly who I'm talking about. You have the Police, who are just up-and-comers. And then you have a group like the Cars that push some of the older artists down a few notches over time. So I was trying to keep up with what was new coming in and keep an open mind. So even though most of these groups are now classic rock groups, at the time, they might have been new and interesting. And I'm like, ooh, I should have an album of theirs and just see what they're all about.
Okay, so you lived in Southwestern Ontario, and we're a little bit isolated, especially being a kid. So aside from getting your albums delivered through Columbia House, how else were you getting albums? Were you stealing them from an older brother? You're obviously too young to drive to the city. How did you get these albums?
Well, I don't really recall either my older siblings getting into music like I did, but they had their share of records and favorite bands. In the mid-1970s, I remember my brother having greatest hits collections of like the Rolling Stones or maybe Rod Stewart, while my sister, who was just 3 years older than me, so at this time, she's a teenager. She's 16 years old. She loves the Bay City Rollers. I was more of a Casey and the Sunshine fan myself. I'm sure they'd pick up a few records for me if they went into the big city, if they went into London or St. Thomas for some reason, or if the whole family went to London. I would usually be allowed to tour the downtown core alone and visit all the record stores before meeting up again in like the jewelry department of a large Simpsons location on the main Dundas Street drag in downtown London. I'm 13 years old. I'm in a city. Okay, I'll meet everybody back here in 2 hours, and I would just go off to do my own thing.
Do you remember the names of the stores where you picked up some of these records? Did you have a favorite?
Well, the biggest one was probably Sam the Record Man. That was the biggest one. There was also a smaller, again, they were like chain stores at the time, but there was Records on Wheels, which was a very cool name, Music World, A&A Records, as well as the individual departments within big department stores like Sears and Eaton's and Hudson Bay and Simpsons. So you would go to these big department stores and you'd go up an escalator or an elevator and you would find they would have their own record department within the store, which was always very cool. Years later, I actually worked in a situation like that when I was in college working, going to school in Hamilton. I worked in one of these little record departments within a department store, which is very cool. Back to me touring around by myself. Now, during these like maybe 2 hours, I would say, wandering treks on my own, my focus was usually to compare album charts, which back then would have been probably $3.99 to $4.99 in range for new albums. And then singles were probably 99 cents to $1.29 maybe everywhere. So it really was never a big difference. It wasn't like one store had it for $4.99 and everybody else had it for $6.99. They were sort of not in collusion at all, but I mean, they were all just competitive with each other.
Okay, now this is my favorite part because I know the story, but for everybody else,
it's a great story.
It is a great story. Was there one particular person in your life that helped you grow your record collection?
Yes, and that man was my dad, Reverend, that's important, Reverend Norman Schlarbaum. Now, as part of his churchly duties, he was the minister in two churches, one in West Lorne where I grew up, and then Rodney, which is another farming community of 1,000 people. They're both still about 1,000 people 40 years later. He would often travel into the city, into London or St. Thomas once or twice a week to visit with sick parishioners in the hospital. That was part of his job. Before I left for school in the morning, I would give him some of my newspaper courier money, which obviously I had lots of, and I would give him a short list of either 45s or albums that I needed, not wanted, Jason, needed. And again, like magic, just like the Columbia House Record Club, these items would appear later in the day, ready to be played over and over again.
I mean, it's such a funny picture to me having, this minister walking in and picking up, these album covers. I know what some of these covers look like. So as a minister, did he have any issues with buying these records for you? Did he ever question some of the content?
He never did. Like, he never said anything to me. He would, I think, just go in with this list, but I always wondered to myself what a record store clerk thought of this, distinguished man. And at that point in time, he would have been probably about 53. So like an old guy. Oh, wait, I just turned 56. I take that back. This young mid-50s man wearing a nice suit and a fedora. And he was going into stores buying records like Turning Japanese by the Vapors or Drugs in My Pocket by the Monks. And then, there's also the infamous Cocaine by your favorite Eric Clapton, which I know you have a big problem with even today.
Yeah, I won't get into my Clapton and cocaine jokes today. Not today.
Not today. A future show. It's coming. It's coming.
That is a discussion for a future show. Okay, so speaking of future episodes.
So what we're going to try to do, Jason, between you and me is the format for each show is going to be sort of the following. We're going to first look at new chart entries, also the fastest movers of the week. We're going to spotlight a few songs or artists. Then we'll also do the same thing for the groups and album charts when the albums kick in a few weeks. And then, like I said earlier, we'll have an overview and comparison of how my choices were for that week compared to RPM, Billboard, and CJBK charts.
Okay, and I'm looking forward to some of these segments. Like, what were you thinking, John? I've asked you that a few times, at least listening to songs in the car.
That could almost be the subtitle of the podcast name.
Really
Music
good.
Virgins No More. What were you thinking, John? I like it. Okay, what other segments are you looking forward to?
My own top 5 singles and surprises, because some of this stuff, of course, I've heard, but a lot of it I haven't. My own top 5 singles is something that I'm looking forward to.
Me too.
We haven't talked about this, but I'm a music producer and a musician myself. So, and I love music history and music recording history. So a breakdown of the song's musical DNA, why it became popular in the first place, and what's some of the technology that may have influenced these songs. So all that's going to be in that segment. And then also our favorite lyrics of the week. And we'll ask listeners to also put that in on Instagram, what their favorite lyrics of the week are after each episode.
Right. And that's the part I'm looking forward to as well. I'm an amateur songwriter. I am a published author. So to me, words are the big things, or why something's catchy, why something sort of sticks with you. Just a line from a song that comes on the radio and you sing along to it because you know it. It's in your musical DNA somehow. And like you said, I am looking forward to your sort of technical side of making music, because I'm not a musician. I can write songs, I can sing the melody, but I need to give it to professionals like yourself as a music producer or somebody in a band who knows about music to put the whole thing together. So to me, I'm really looking forward to that favorite lyrics of the week to find out what sort of hit you the first time you listen to it. So I'm also looking forward to the favorite lyrics of the week segment. Now, after each episode, we're going to be posting that week's featured chart, the actual physical chart, any relevant photos and any information we didn't get to on our Instagram and Facebook pages.
Okay, and to conclude our first episode, John, can you tell everyone what was your top 15 singles for the week of August 23rd, 1980?
Of course I can. So the top 15 singles, and I'm going to read them in order from 1 to 15. I think that's going to be easier for everybody to follow. The number 1 song was Play the Game by Queen. The number 2 song was Coming Up, the live version by Paul McCartney and Wings. Number 3, Joe Walsh, who would then join the Eagles. Number 4, Clones by Alice Cooper. Number 5, Emotional Rescue by the Rolling Stones. Number 6, still a favorite of mine all these years later, is Take a Little Rhythm by Allie Thompson, basically a one-hit wonder. Number 7, Tired of Toeing the Line by Rocky Burnett. Number 8, Shining Star, The Manhattans. Number 9, Magic by Olivia Newton-John. Number 10, My Mistake by the King Bees, and we will do sort of a segment on them in a future episode. And then you have the first of 2 Robbie Dupree songs. The first one is Steal Away at number 11, followed by Little Genie by Elton John. Number 13 was Cars by Gary Newman. Number 14, Brass in Pocket by The Pretenders. And then rounding out the top 15 is the second single by Robbie Dupree. And again, people are going, who is Robbie Dupree? Again, in a future episode, all your questions will be answered. And at number 15 was Hot Rod Hearts. So Jason, my favorite lyric of the week is from the Kings song, My Mistake. And it goes, I had to choose between school or a rock and roll band. Now, what would be your favorite lyric of the week?
My favorite lyric of the week is from Alice Cooper's Clones. 6 is having problems adjusting to his clone status. Have to put him on a shelf. Please don't put me on a shelf. All day long we hear him crying so loud. I just want to be by myself.
And it's a great song. Like, it's one of these songs, again, we will get a little further into in a future episode. But to me, Clones is like this hidden little song that I'm really surprised no one has ever done, even like a Blink 182 or something in the 90s or early 2000s didn't take this song and make it their own. But that's for another episode.
I think it would make a great concept record with Mr. Roboto by Styx.
Exactly. Styx. Love it.
Okay, John, and what were your top 15 groups for the same week?
Top 15 groups. We already mentioned the top 5. So that was Paul McCartney and Wings, Queen, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, Billy Joel, Pete Townsend. And then coming up at number 6 is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Number 7, the Jay Giles Band. Number 8, Genesis. Number 9, Pat Benatar. Number 10, the Eagles. Number 11, Pink Floyd. Number 12, one of your favorites, Supertramp. Number 13, Christopher Cross. Number 14, The Pretenders. And number 15, Cheap Trick. Now that's a hell of a starting off point, right, Jason?
I have a lot to say already, but I'll keep it to myself until the next episode.
So, Jason, what is it about this podcast that you are looking forward to the most? I sort of sprung the existence of these charts on you one night when we were, sitting around talking, and you were like fascinated by it. I don't know if you're fascinated because you were thinking, what was he thinking when he was doing this? Or you like the concept of going back in time and seeing literally a chunk of history about AM radio. So what are you looking forward to the most over the next few weeks?
I'm looking forward to the connecting the dots historically with radio play in Canada, with CanCon rules and what you were listening. Also, technology was just rising so fast everywhere in the world, but especially in the music industry. So I want to see those moments, when a specific synthesizer came out and how music changed suddenly. And then also just hearing stuff that I've never heard before. Of course, I know the big 80s songs, a bunch of the ones you listed are some of my favorite songs of all time, but there's a lot of stuff. Will it make the grade? Will it make the cut? Will it stand the test of time? So that's really what I'm looking forward to.
I think it's going to be, I'm very excited about this project, and I can't wait to hear and debate your thoughts on all of these things when, I was a mere teenager. I mean, you're looking down your nose going, oh, I wouldn't have done that. But it was John. It was good. So we want to thank you, the listener, the new listener, for starting this unique musical journey with us. Join us next week when we tackle the week of August 30th, 1980, and find out if Queen's Play the Game remains in the number 1 position, and if Air Supply's All Out of Love cracks the top 10 in its first week on the chart.
The Music Virgins No More podcast was recorded in Amherstburg, Ontario and Lloydminster, Alberta. A quick shout out to Dennis Wong of London, Ontario for providing the podcast with various weekly CJBK radio music charts from 1979 to 1983.